Thank you, Bjorn, and indeed, thank you for all the coffee discussions. They were very helpful and constructive. I think some of the ideas that we shared just before the coffee break are actually potentially proving helpful to some of the delegations around the table who had comments. And so we'll be working on this this afternoon and fine-tune those proposals so that you can take a more precise look at what we are proposing. But just to recap what this was, one idea would be to describe non-specific support in a precise way rather than call it non-specific support in the recommendation itself, so that you don't need to go to the preamble to see what we mean by that. And this also helps eliminate this formulation of non-specific support in the recommendation itself. Another suggestion was to separate out recommendation 7 under a new recommends title and do the same with recommendation number 3 on fishing and fishing related activities outside the jurisdiction of a coastal state or outside the competence of a relevant RFMO, also under a separate recommends heading. And so this would help clarify that the first recommends heading really relates to support to fisheries. So we are, really clearly talking about only fishery support and in relation to IUU fishing. So this would be three proposals that we have. We would also try to soften the language of that recommendation 7 according to some of the suggestions made by including text like where practical or something equivalent in that recommendation. We would propose including some of the language proposed by the EU in relation to denying access to port or inspection. And I think that should be helpful for a couple of delegations. So we'll be making use of that suggestion. And then, of course, we would also address the other small text edits that we received that I can't go into any detail now. Some of the other comments are maybe a bit more, haven't been really responded to. For example, on recommendation 2, the first bullet point, there was a suggestion by Norway to potentially take out a chunk of that Japan also in principle would like to support, but we don't really know what others think about that. So maybe that's something that you can give us your views on more tomorrow. So we'll put this maybe in a different way because we don't really know where we stand on this particular recommendation. Anything I missed?
We'll see.
Okay.
I don't think so. Probably not. You normally don't. So I don't think so. Thank you very much, Claire, again for outlining that. I think from speaking to a number of delegations, I think that Claire has already before the break kind of made her points on the suggested changes to the recommendation. So what is going to happen is, of course, that you will also see a text. You will need to do that to understand that, and you will need to speak to your colleagues who are experts in this field and so on. So we will post this afternoon, and we will then return to this item tomorrow morning. And that means that we will, as Claire already mentioned, we will start at 10 a.m., not 10:30 as it indicated on the agenda, but 10 a.m. Paris time. So a brief slightly earlier start, but the same as today. So you know the drill in the security lounge and so on. So I'm sure you will be here. And tomorrow then we will have a new discussion on this revised draft. Claire mentioned an outstanding point also that might not be revised, but you're happy to can express yourselves on that as well. But tomorrow I would like to hear, have we understood you correctly? Yeah, have we heard you right? Have we gone in your direction? Have we gone too far and so on? So the broad strokes of this text I would like you to react to tomorrow. And then we will, based on that discussion, we will also, of course, decide on what's the next steps. So thank you very much again for all your comments and questions on this recommendation and your active engagement on this process. And you will see a new text this afternoon, and we will return to this item tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Okay, yeah, until lunch, you can send as much feedback as you want. So that's 35 minutes. No, but again, thank you very much. And if you have comments in writing, as soon as possible, of course, which will help the Secretariat to produce a new version. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Okay, thank you very much. I now pause this agenda item and we move to agenda item 5, which is also an important agenda item. It's the initial discussion of an action plan to respond to the in-depth evaluation of the Fisheries Committee. And I'm sure you recall that the in-depth evaluation of COFI for the period of 2015 to 2021 produced a series of recommendations aimed at improving the functioning of this committee, its relevance and the quality of its products. And to respond to these recommendations, the committee is now requested to produce an action plan detailing the measures that should be taken. Now, we will hear a little bit from the Secretariat on the process for developing such an action plan, some preliminary ideas from the Secretariat on actions the committee may want to take in addition to what is already being done, of course, and the expected next step for such a plan. And today is an opportunity for you also to put forward suggestions, discuss any actions that will be floated by the Secretariat as possible responses to this evaluation. And we should advance on this, but I think the Secretariat will say a little bit more about the timeline. So I'll wait on that and give the floor to Claire again. Sorry, Guillaume, to outline a little bit the process. Guillaume, please.
Thank you. We do have a presentation, so that will hopefully clarify the process. Do you have the pointer? Oh, just shoot what you're saying. Thank you very much. As you will see on this slide, here's the process and the timing determined by the practices of the evaluation committee. So the in-depth evaluation recommendations were known to COFI before the Council formally adopted it. There was previous discussion on the first version of with the evaluation committee and EXCO, of course. So COFI already reflected on this recommendation in the context of reviewing its mandate. And you already began responding to the IDA recommendation by actively engaging the development of a legal instrument that we just mentioned and talked about. So the Council approved the IDA recommendation in July 2023, and that triggered a 6-month deadline for approval of the COFI action plan to respond to those recommendations. And this is according to regular procedures, not just for COFI. So the initial discussion we're having on this is today. We'll invite further inputs in writing after this meeting by the end of the year. And then there will be a proposal for discussion and approval through written procedure in the first quarter of 2024. The presentation of the COFI IDE action plan by the Secretariat will be on 4 April 2024 to the evaluation committee. And that will trigger a new 6-month deadline for monitoring report and implementation, at least the initial implementation, of course. And monitoring report to the evaluation commission will report to the council on the implementation of this recommendation in the fall of 2024. So it starts a train that goes really fast for us, and we're just trying to make sure we're advancing on some of those recommendations in the next few months. And so get your feedback first, and then see how we can report to the council that we've started in the right way. Ideally, the monitoring report would be approved by COFI by written procedure in September 2024 before it goes to the council, of course. So more in terms of substance now, going to those recommendations, you remember some of those, of course. There were a number of those. So we have, we'll go through each of those and say what we think we've already in place and what, we at Secretariat would have initial suggestions on. So starting with increased capital-based participation to the COFI. So we had an additional day of meeting with workshops, and it is open to encouraging wider government participation in this particular meeting. Should we make this a new normal once a year or once for the cycle of the program of work and budget? Could it also be expanded into a fish week? Now we have in the directorate, we have an agriculture week when we have global forum and usually some other events plus the committee on agriculture. That was in October this year. We also have a trade week. So we're thinking about a fish week, and it might be a fish week this week, because we also have the World Fisheries Days. So second point, on aquaculture, we were asked to make sure, we are actually engaged into aquaculture work. So we're having a dedicated workshop this afternoon to investigate where OECD could bring value in this particular meeting. There could also be ideas of new project on aquaculture, for discussion when thinking about the program of work and budget for 2025, 2026. Of course, this has resource implications. So should we do, does it mean that we provide less resource to capture fisheries related work, or that we get voluntary contributions to actually advance our work on aquaculture? That's the type of question that we have. Number 3 on the items that we had as recommendation, contribute to work done at the WTO. So that we've done some work because we have this draft recommendation on eliminating government support to IUU fishing, which complements and supports implementation of one of the key provisions of the fishery subsidies agreements. We have ongoing FSC database update that will continue to make key data available for negotiators as needed. And there is WTO regularly attend, of course, the coffee meetings, and we've also provided a presentation at WTO as well. And it's also, there's a proposal for observed status in the mandate renewal for the WTO. Our initial proposal, at least suggestion, would be that the next edition of the review of fisheries further describe and discuss trends in global support policies. Of course, that will be expected, but that will also help the process. On gender equality, here we don't have anything concrete yet, but we were thinking of a few things that could be envisaged by members. We could have a dedicated agenda item in the next coffee meeting, inviting exchanging experiences in addressing gender equality in fisheries. That would be a possibility. We're open to other possibility in terms of, either events, discussions, or otherwise. Of course, if it's work, it's of course related to resources in the program of work and budget or outside of this program of work and budget. Point 5, standard setting. Again, we have the draft recommendation on eliminating government support to IUU fishing that is being discussed. And we discuss the possibility in the future to engage into a recommendation or an instrument on vessel ownership transparency, with a project to start with. Point 6, so that could be potentially seen in the future. Point 6, timing of document distribution. So we are trying to follow TAD best practices with 4 weeks deadline for documents and 2 weeks for room documents ahead of the meetings. But we realize that this might not be always systematic. We have also trade and agriculture. So sometimes we have a lot of documents at the same time going to the same place. So we probably will collect data and try to find improvements to make sure those timelines are respected. Actually, that should be point 7. Communication at outreach. So in this one, there's the revamped OECD Fisheries and Aquaculture website that you might have seen already. That was already set up a while ago. We've seen an increased use of short policy briefs, the one that were associated with the review of fisheries. We really try to do a wide dissemination, including in FAO and WTO meetings. We have seen great results from the social media campaign of the last review of fisheries. We have some initial outcome of this. There is new coffee communications informals groups that you were invited to. There is a workshop on key message videos. And what we propose in the future could be that, of course, there will be a new OECD-wide website that will be for everything that we do at OECD, and where we'll make sure that fisheries and aquaculture is actually well represented. And we'll also take advantage of the forthcoming open access publication policies to try to disseminate more of our reports in fisheries. Of course, we're open to other suggestions. And point 8, which should be the last one, is on cooperation with non-members. We have a continued cooperation with other organizations in reaching out to non-members, an active engagement of participants in COFI, including some around this table. And we have a request by Ukraine to become a participant. So we'll see if that's followed up. Now, what could we do next? And that's that suggestion we had internally, since we had this workshop on climate change yesterday, that was open to other participants, experts, not participants in terms of OECD, but other types of people coming in. Could we have what we call a global forum on fisheries? So that's, we have global forums on different committees, on agriculture, on trade in particular, but also on environment and others. That could be part of a Fish Week. So it's sort of like an event that you discuss a particular theme where you invite non-members to participate. It has to be formalized in some ways so that it's reported in, I think, in the program of work and budget. But, of course, it might require some resources, but, just like we've done those workshops, it might be possible to do that. We're also open to other opportunities. So I think I'll close on this. And the point is really to, trigger initial reactions on this or questions on the process or on the suggestions that we have here. And I give back the floor to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guillaume, for that presentation, and to you and the Secretariat for producing these potential action points. And some of them, as you mentioned, we've already started working with, and I think it's good to show the evaluation committee that action has already been taken. So that's an important part of it. But now I would very much welcome any intervention by members, both, of course, on the suggested points by the Secretariat, which I realize you have just seen. So they'll be very preliminary, but also if you have any additional or suggestions from your side that you think could be included in such an action plan. United States, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the presentation on some of the action item ideas. There's certainly some really good ones in there, and we will keep thinking about the various ideas. But we did have a couple things that we had pulled together, and so we wanted to share those now for the room. On the first recommendation, in increasing participation in the committee. We think keeping the meetings hybrid is a great way to help increase participation, and particularly for bringing capital experts and letting them benefit from at least listening to the discussions. We also wanted to reiterate, I think, something we talked about in May, which is that if we are going to add workshops to the sessions, the fall is a really challenging time because it is RFMO season. And so many of the experts that we'd want to pull are elsewise engaged. ICAT is going on this week, for example. WCPFC is in a week and a half. And that's just 2 of the RFMOs that exist. And so we'd encourage looking at the spring, which maybe would have a little bit more flexibility for experts to be able to come in person. So that would be one suggestion. On the second recommendation about incorporating aquaculture, I think we're going to have a couple ideas, but one that we flagged in May that we'd mention again is making sure that we're incorporating it to the existing work. So into the review on fisheries, in this work that we're going to be talking about on climate change. We heard it come up a number of times in the climate change discussions yesterday. And so making sure we're looking for opportunities to bring it into the stuff we're already doing a little bit more effectively. On the third recommendation related to supporting the WTO agreement and the work to understand subsidies, the OECD work has been incredibly helpful in understanding the landscape of support to fisheries over the years and in the negotiations at the WTO. But there is often confusion between about the difference in definition of what is captured in the 2 systems. And so perhaps we could do more to help really understand and deconflict those understandings, make sure people really understand the difference and what this information means and what we're providing, which I think would be really, really helpful. I'm going to skip a couple on number 6, talking about timing for documents. I think 4 weeks would be quite helpful in preparing for meetings. 4 weeks is a good suggestion from the Secretariat. And last but not least, kind of related to 7, but really a number of them. There are a number of things that are already being captured by the Secretariat, particularly in the new communication strategy. And so I think that's going to also capture a number of the recommendations the ID has made to us that we're already kind of actively undertaking work to implement those. And we're also very excited to hear about the open access publication policy. I think that's going to really help the usability of OECD documents if they're more publicly available. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, United States. I give the floor to Spain, and then I have Sweden online. So
yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Guillaume, for the presentation, because I think it's very useful in order to see all the process with the timings. So we have time to work on all these documents. But I just wanted to raise one thing, because I mean, everything that you were showing for every recommendation. So of course it's very relevant things that we have already done, as you have said, we are already doing during this coffee. But in relation with the possible global forum of fisheries, so I was thinking that maybe how we organize the coffee with a workshop in the middle of the coffee. I think it has been a good idea, but maybe to move it, to open it as more as a global forum of fisheries, that could be as a workshop. So, but as you said, we have the Global Forum of Agriculture. Usually we intend to organize it just before the committee or after the committee, but on the same week. So I think this can be a good idea, because if we open it, so we can put more experts on the workshop. I mean, changing the wording, calling it forum, maybe we can open it, and then to have more people engaged, more experts, and like different people coming, not just the delegates and the experts of the coffee, because then we can open it. I think that could be a good idea. But anyway, we can continue thinking about and moving it on the week. It's true that OECD has very busy weeks already. So a full fisheries week, I don't know if we can fit, because we have regions week, agriculture week, fisheries week. So I don't know if the year has so many weeks. Maybe we need to apply for more. But yeah, maybe spring it could be better time than autumn. We can, I mean, move this. It will depend on how other events, because I'm already asking, being from the delegation covering our experts in Spain and in agriculture and fisheries and regions. So it's important for us just not split and not having the important meetings on the same weeks. So it's hard job for the OECD to try to place all this, but I think it's a good idea, Guillaume, what you showed to us. Thank you very much.
thank you, Spain, for those comments. I give the floor to Sweden online, and then I have Canada in the room. So Sweden, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, the Secretariat, for presenting the process of developing the action plan. We just have some small notifications. So Sweden suggests that the action plan should be based on focus areas added in the renewed mandate on the effect of climate change on the fishing sector and how the fishing sector can adapt to reduce its fossil emission. We believe that issues within the aquaculture sector should increase in priority, since it is increasing in terms of production and relevance globally. Further, Sweden would like to also emphasize on the importance of including the gender perspective in the committee's activities. We would like to see a collection on gender-specific data to include it in the reporting and analyzing of individual-based statistics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sweden. Now I give the floor to Canada and then New Zealand. So Canada, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the Secretariat. So a few suggestions from Canada on the recommendations. So we found yesterday with workshops we find that yesterday's workshops offered much appreciated intel on the state of literature and research in a number of relevant areas, and I think including similar workshops with a certain regularity would be a welcome addition to the work of the committee. This is with respect to recommendation number 1. With respect to recommendation number 2, Canada strongly supports expansion of the committee's work in the field of aquaculture. Ideally, a set of shared priorities will emerge from this afternoon's workshop. And without prejudging the outcome of this afternoon's workshop, it seems it will be important to begin building a data inventory to support future analysis of aquaculture policies and to increase the profile of aquaculture within the reviews of fisheries. Canada looks forward to the workshop discussion on this matter, as well as the discussion later in the plenary, where aquaculture may be discussed in the context of the next program of work and budget. And finally, on recommendation number 4, Canada would like to suggest that this recommendation may present an ideal opportunity to collaborate with experts from elsewhere in the organization. The Public Governance Committee released the OECD Toolkit for Mainstreaming and Implementing Gender Equality. And while committees are not a target of the toolkit, the authors may be able to provide insights into productive steps for the committee to take. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada. New Zealand, please.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand accepts the recommendations proposed by the in-depth evaluation, and we thank the Secretariat for the progress made so far. We would like to highlight the IUU proposal in response to the diversification of scope of the COFI program work proposed in recommendation 5. And we think that progressing the vessel ownership transparency work would be a further positive step. We also support the US comments on the usefulness of hybrid meetings. We do, however, note that the additional work proposed through the evaluation recommendations are dependent on funding, and with those fiscal considerations in mind, New Zealand would caution against the expansion of external outreach as proposed in recommendation 8 without securing the necessary resources, particularly if they have to be extra budgetary. And we wonder if perhaps COFI could explore opportunities to work cooperatively with others within the OECD, perhaps within the Environment Directorate or other OECD directorates. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. Next, I have Australia.
Thank you, Chair. So it's good to see the suggestions already laid out by the Secretariat, and in particular, the fact that COFI is already acting on many of these, so that stands us in good stead to act on the IDE recommendations. Just very quickly, we would also echo the US and New Zealand on the usefulness of hybrid meetings. Looking through recommendations, we would strongly support increased work on aquaculture, and I'm sure that we discussed in the context of PWB discussions, but agree with the US again on incorporating that into existing work streams, such as the review on fisheries. Just on the issue of gender, so clearly an important topic, but we'd sort of note the references already made to the limited resources of the committee, but also of national agencies. So collecting and reporting data is something that, you know, is challenging for us, and I'm sure many other members. So just with regards to suggestions to sort of expand data collection on that, I think we'd be keen that that take into account resourcing of the committee and of national agencies. And so the suggestion to have to address the topic in workshops or within COFI meetings is a good one that perhaps might be more manageable.
Thank you very much. Any further comments from members at this stage? Have the opportunity to share your written comments as well, of course. Japan, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Secretariat for the explanation about our action plan. With regard to the participants from the capitals, I agree with other members holding the COFI meeting in a hybrid manner. Personally, it is difficult for me to support having Fish Week. In such a case, I would be spending 2 weekends on a plane. With regard to effort in the field of aquaculture, COFI should conduct analysis and other activities in area where the COFI has an advantage, avoiding duplication of work with other international organizations such as the FAO. For example, with the expected increase in global aquaculture production, the COFI may have an advantage in analyzing what kind of government support will mitigate the environmental impact of aquaculture. And regarding the cooperation with the non-members, I'm not sure if it is the best agenda item to discuss such matter, but in order to better understand the situation, could the Secretariat explain which non-members were invited to this session, if it's possible? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan, for comments and questions indeed. Anybody else would like to take the floor at this stage? Doesn't seem to be the case. I would perhaps give the floor to the Secretariat if you would like to respond or comment to any of the interventions. Jon?
Sorry, can I comment?
Oops. Oh, UK. Yeah.
Sorry, I had my hand
Sorry,
up.
we have the UK online. So go ahead, UK. That's fine.
Thank you very much. Yes, we'd like to thank the Secretariat for its work on the IDE. The UK agrees with the suggested need to coordinate with other organisations and would suggest this could be particularly constructive in relation to climate change, with upcoming discussions occurring at FAO and the UN. Likewise, given the prominence of climate change, it may be appropriate to come back to the theme that we discussed yesterday in a lighter touch approach if members have pertinent policy updates to share in due course to inform the policymaking process. We value the idea of including workshops to discuss thematic topics on a more regular basis. We found the discussion yesterday helpful and are looking forward to the discussion on aquaculture this afternoon. We think design of these discussions is key to ensure that they are adding value and build on and support discussions happening in other fora, so that can be adapted as appropriate. The UK agrees with the comments from our colleagues in the US to consider timing in the spring to allow for experts to be engaged in the hybrid running of the meetings. Further to workshops to discuss topics, we think that it would also be valuable to allow time for members to discuss implementation of recommendations in due course, progress made, and discuss challenges with their implementation to learn from the approach of others. The UK would be in favour of furthering work on vessel owner transparency, as mentioned by New Zealand, and the UK would be open-minded on additional data collection for aquaculture support policies, but in a proportionate way to minimise burdens on members. Thank you very much.
Thanks, UK. Sorry we missed you there, Sam. I think we can now give the floor to Guillaume again from the Secretariat to comment.
Thank you for this initial inputs. As I said, we are looking forward to also written inputs by the end of the year. I don't know what the date will be. So we take those points already. And I heard several of you talking about the fish week being too long. I mean, it was just it's a phrase that we use when we have 3 days of meeting. For us, it's like a week because we know you have to travel, and it's a lot of work to also prepare. So it doesn't have to be 5 days, and we don't have rooms for 5 days usually. But that's just a clarification. But see some interest in doing more workshop or global forum on fishery. So we'll have to see how we go on this. Looking forward. And then on the question by Japan, actually, I don't think I know exactly the list of invitees. I mean, Claire, do you want to say if there was anybody, or we should refer to another document?
Only the people who participated.
Okay, this time it was only the people that you see in this room that are participants to the coffee. There was no new invitee. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Guillaume. Indeed, some thoughts already put forward, and there are some themes I can see perhaps emerging from the comments. Aquaculture has been mentioned, and we will of course return to this afternoon. There's interest in the workshop format and how to make that work. I think both of these, and also the comments that have been made about the gender dimension, these are all, as was mentioned also this morning by Ms. Jansen, these are all, we have to take the resource situation into account, obviously. So that's something to consider when we approve the final version of the action plan later on. But for now, let's put the ideas on the table, and you have done that. So thank you very much. And thank you to the Secretariat for preparing this discussion. I think there's a good basis for submitting your proposals by the end of the year, as Guillaume said. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, for me, the deadline was the end of the year.
End of the year. Yeah.
End of the year. I think that's fine.
End of the year is the 31st of December on our calendar. So if you want to do that, it's fine.
Mm.
As I recall, the Bureau had to do something with the evaluation around the 5th of January. So, you know, we're no strangers to working the holidays, but no, as soon as possible, of course, and before you go on your holiday breaks would be great, and then that will enable the Secretariat to work with it, and you'll post this obviously more formally also on the portal, so everybody knows what's happening, and it's quite a simple document, especially if you compare it to the IUU recommendations. So I think we can work with this. Okay. I think that concludes this agenda item, and we'll return then to this through written procedure intersessionally, just to approve this this coming action plan. So thank you very much for your initial comments. And that also concludes the morning session and the sort of plenary part of this day. After the lunch break at 2 p.m. we will return to this room though, and to the online room as well, for the much awaited workshop on sustainable aquaculture. So be here at 2 p.m. and have a very nice lunch break, everybody. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amara, and I'm a consultant to the OECD and undertaking a PhD on the blue economy. It is truly a pleasure to be here today, and I extend my gratitude to the Secretariat for the opportunity to present and share insights on government support to aquaculture. I'll be shedding light on what we know, and perhaps more intriguingly, what we don't know about government support to aquaculture. But before we begin, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land in which I present from today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So to start at the beginning, what is government support to aquaculture? I thought I would start at the beginning and provide a brief explanation of what government support to aquaculture actually is. As the name suggests, government support to aquaculture broadly refers to support provided by the government to the aquaculture sector. It is comparable to fisheries support, which is the financial transfers from governments to the fisheries sectors through such mechanisms as direct payments, public financing, tax concessions, and concessional finance. However, the extent to which government support to aquaculture refers to specific support or considers a range of different sectors, i.e. non-specific, is something to consider. For example, in some settings, government support to fisheries only refers to fisheries-specific support. So, why does all this matter? I will try not to rehash anything already mentioned before. The expansion of aquaculture may provide benefits to food security, economic growth, reduce pressures on fisheries, and provide employment. Yet, at the same time, the continued growth of aquaculture will come with its challenges, as with any industry. In fact, aquaculture already faces several challenges, such as environmental impacts, disease management, social license to operate, and climate change vulnerability, just to name a few. Governments and policymakers are increasingly acknowledging the potential benefits of aquaculture to their regions, which, as we will see, typically comes in the form of some kind of government support. However, at a global aggregated scale, we don't have a clear picture of what this support looks like, and therefore the potential effects of such policies is a bit of a black box. This means that there is a knowledge gap, making it difficult to assess such support policies. We don't know if they are beneficial or harmful across a range of domains, including food security, environment, and climate change adaptation and international trade, potentially leaving aquaculture exposed to suboptimal levels of support and missed research collaboration opportunities.
Amara, could I just ask you one thing? Is it possible on your screen to make it in presentation mode? Because what we see is all your notes for yourself. No, but it makes it much smaller.
I'm actually already in presentation mode. Let me have a.
Sorry.
Let me put,
There we go.
Does that,
there we go. Thank you.
Has that Sorry, I chose the wrong one, and I realized my camera doesn't seem to be working all of a sudden. It was working perfectly before. Okay. Where was I? So more specifically, access to aquaculture support. Sorry, this means that there is a knowledge gap. I'll take it from there, making it difficult to access such support policies. We don't know if they're beneficial or harmful across a range of domains, including food security, environment and climate change adaptation, and international trade, potentially leaving aquaculture exposed to suboptimal levels of support and missed research collaboration opportunities. More specifically, access to aquaculture support could really help us to better understand and explore some really important issues, such as whether policies that support the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from food exist from aquaculture, and how support to aquaculture impacts trade flows of fish production, and how we might be able to better unlock the potential of aquaculture support to foster a sustainable industry. In other words, without aggregated aquaculture support data, we don't know if these policies are efficient and if they are accomplishing what they are setting out to achieve, and if we can do it better for the betterment of all. But what do we know so far? To date, we have started collecting policy data on government aquaculture support. This policy data collection is illustrative in nature and does not capture the full gamut of aquaculture policies out there. This inventory does not attempt to measure the magnitude of policies in any way, shape, or form, but rather attempts to begin to illustrate the types of policies available to the aquaculture sector so that we might begin to understand what it is that we need to know. The illustrative industry has sourced its information from various sources. This includes policies that have previously been provided by member states, the inventory of support measures for fossil fuels, government and international governmental organizations, such as the notifications to the World Trade Organization's Committee on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures. This work on government support to aquaculture is ongoing, and we are discovering new insights every day. But what do we know so far? First and foremost, we know that in one way or another, most governments provide some form of support to aquaculture, spanning the entire aquaculture value chain. This support encompasses activities from the hatchery and nursery stages to the grow-out phase, and further extends to market activities, processing, storage, transportation, as well as market distribution. However, it is worth noting that some policies are ambiguous in nature, and their specific position within the value chain is not always clear. The types of support provided to the aquaculture sector is diverse in nature and have been found to benefit support for fuel consumption, preferential insurance, research and development, income support, marketing and promotion, as well as environmental maintenance. In noting these categories, so far we have found that research and development seems to be an area of significant policy interest. We know that some of these policies have similarities with the fisheries sector, or indeed also target the fisheries sector. For example, policies geared towards fuel tax exemptions, concessions or levies to the benefit of the aquaculture sector have also been found in a number of countries, including Canada, Australia, Brazil, Denmark, and the United Kingdom and the United States. Some other examples of policies include aid for the payment of insurance premiums for aquaculture stock policies in Spain, and similarly in China for natural disasters. The provision of energy-saving equipment, such as heat pumps and inverters, as well as policies to support the monitoring, that is both ecologically and market-related monitoring of the aquaculture sector, have also been found in South Korea. There have also been policies geared towards promoting the consumption of more seafood, such as through the Eat More Seafood Grant Program in New South Wales, Australia. I must again note that these examples do not distinguish between specific and non-specific aquaculture support policies. So, what is it that we don't know? There is a lot we don't know when it comes to government support to aquaculture, and I guess in some respects that is the whole point of this discussion. At an aggregated scale, the nature of the support and the various forms of assistance remains largely unknown. We lack comprehensive understanding of where the support is directed, who benefits or loses out, the scale of support and the impact of these support policies on food security, trade, and the environment. Due to these information gaps, we are unable to assess the effectiveness of these policies and determine whether they are achieving their intended goals. So, as I come to the conclusion of my presentation, I just wanted to ask the audience, do you know how much support goes to aquaculture in your country? How does that compare to support to agriculture and fisheries in your country? And how does this compare to the rest of the world? Thinking that maybe not all countries will know the answers, as I personally didn't find the answers to these questions, I would also be interested to hear from the audience and how the OECD could begin to fill all these information gaps. Could the OECD take inspiration from existing solutions? For example, the OECD, as we've heard before, has a database for support to agriculture and fisheries. So could there be something similar for aquaculture? For those of you who are unfamiliar with these databases, the support to agriculture database measures the value of transfers from consumers and taxpayers to agricultural products. Similarly, the fisheries support estimate database measures, describes, and classifies government support to the fisheries sector, and its purpose is to form an objective and standardized evidence base for policy. It currently excludes aquaculture, but includes marine and inland fishing for commercial and recreational purposes. These OECD databases provide a foundational framework for conducting policy analysis at the country, regional, and aggregate levels. These databases support the facilitation of publications, collaborative international dialogue, and communication, as well as providing evidence-based policy analysis. But this is just one potential idea, and I would be really interested to hear what ideas you might have in helping to better understand government support to aquaculture. And so with that, I will conclude my presentation. Apologies for the technical glitches. And I will share with you my email address for any great ideas or just generally any thoughts, comments, or queries. Really looking forward to hearing all your brilliant ideas. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Amara. One can really hear that you have been working with the OECD for some time, focusing on government support. And of course, this is one of the big areas and the big discussions that the COFI needs to have over the next couple of days, years, whatever, about how much work they really want to invest in aquaculture and aquaculture support measures. There's no doubt that based on what you have mentioned here, that there's a lot out there that needs to be looked at. And possibly we also need to be thinking about different methodologies from what we have in the fisheries PSE work that you also have been involved in. But there are a range of things and issues that perhaps our chair of the Fisheries Committee will take up later on this afternoon as possible ways forward for consideration by COFI. Thank you very much, Amara. I hope you stick with us here for the time being, because we will move forward with the next presentations, and then we'll have some discussions, and we will maybe then have some questions answers for you as well. We will now move into the policymakers' perspective, and the questions that we're asking ourselves, as you have on the agenda, is how have countries been successful in developing and greening their aquaculture sector, and what has been the challenge? Anyway, let's move forward because we are a little bit short of time. We have Hüseyin Dede from the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry in Turkey. You're the General Director of Fisheries and Aquaculture. Are you online?
Yes, I am online.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chair. Dear delegates and participants, I'm Hüseyin Dede. I will present Turkish aquaculture situation and approach to developing under climate changes. Aquaculture activities which started in 80s are becoming increasingly widespread and shaped according to demands of national and international market in Turkey. Nothing in the world continues without problems. Aquaculture goes through the same crucible. Turkey has a complex geography between 3 continents in Eastern Mediterranean basin. Even though Turkey already has a complex climate structure. In addition, Eastern Mediterranean basin is the one of the area most affected by climate change and related global warming. Turkey surrounded coastlines of Black Sea, Marmara Sea, Aegean Sea, and Mediterranean Sea. Within the framework of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Turkey has commitments to comply with update national determined contributions. Next slide. Birazcık sorsan sunuyu görüyor mu? Sunuyu gördün mü kaçtı? Representative consultation pathways according to RCP-based climate projections, Turkey will face temperature increasing approximately 1.7 degrees Celsius by the middle of the century. The most sensitive area, Aegean and Mediterranean coasts. Over the past 60 years, the average temperature has increased by 12 degrees Celsius. And in the last 20 years, this figure has increased over the 3 degrees Celsius. So, if we look at the sea part, with the positive changes in the sea surface temperature, we will face acidification and corresponding pH decrease in Turkish seas. Especially after 2014, the seas became more prone and anomalies in terms of both temperature and pH. This slide shows key marine indicators such as temperature, pH, oxygen, and chlorophyll through the mid-century climate forecast for Aegean, Black Sea, and Levantine seas. For RCP 1.0 low scenario, the Aegean Sea will be warmer. Interestingly, while the chlorophyll values increased in the Levantine basin, they decreased in others. The pH and oxygen decrease in the Black Sea will be higher than others. According to worst case of scenario RCP4, the Aegean Sea will become warmer again. The chlorophyll levels will decrease in the Levantine basin. The pH value of Black Sea is lowest. But in this scenario, the oxygen concentration is different compared with RCP 1.5. The Aegean Sea appears to be worse in the terms of dissolved oxygen. The most likely negative effects of climate change that will encounter will be an increase in surface temperature, sea level, and salinity, and dramatic decrease in dissolved oxygen. The ecosystem will also change in terms of migration routes, species population density, and competition with invasive species. There must be socioeconomic consequences, such as difficulties in accessing and ensuring the safety of fish stocks. This figure shows the Turkish fisheries and aquaculture production. You will see the red line is the production is growing sustainably in recent years. Sustainability-based aquaculture production is important for healthy development of the sector. This could be achieved by taking into account environmental, ecological, social, and economic parameters and data sets, also result of research. Although sea bream, sea bass, trout, black mussel, and are the main species of aquaculture in Turkey. Also, tuna farming is growing on this area. New and alternative species also produced in Turkey. Climate change also affecting not only aquaculture, also wild. In these purposes, the increase of invasive species, changes in migration routes, in harms of the food chain, competency between native and invasive species, changing fishing season, undesirable different in growth, maturity, and egg quality of species. Regional variation in fish stocks, mucilage trade, and various problems occurring depending on climate change. In this slide, the heavy rainfall and contrary lack of the sufficient rain and snow for a long time decreased in the budget of water in both surface and underground water resources, and increased seasonal water temperature are among the most important negative effects of climate change on aquaculture in inland waters. Since the trout farming is mostly done in inland waters in our country, changes in the amount of temperature of water directly affect the sector. However, since the amount of water in dam lakes has decreased seasonally in recent years due to effects of climate change, this problem is affecting the loss of the harvest and the production rate. What happens after these problems? Since 40 years, ministry has developed different strategy. For example, allocated zone for aquaculture. We had many problems with the environment, tourism, maritimes, military, and this kind of problem is affected to aquaculture production. And we started to allocate the zone for aquaculture and environmental impact assessments and new technology and bivalve mollusk culture, recirculation for aquaculture system, and hatcheries. And in the past, it was the production and the cost line. After this allocation, we moved to offshore this aquaculture production outside the coast. And net cage farm to be established in the sea must have at least 1.25 kilometers from Gulf, other 5 meters offshore, at least 44 Gulf, other 30 meters of water depth, at least 0.0 meter second flow velocity. And also there is a standard between the facilities. It should be more than 1 kilometer. Legislation for sustainable for aquaculture management, fish welfare, circular rules for stock density, feed, FCR rates by species, reduction of action and carbon footprints. Adaptation actions, introducing practice to encourage fishing and of foreign and invasive species, for example, award-winning fishing permits, inclusive to this type of in our culinary and cuisine culture. Use of some alien and invasive species in the cosmetic and pharmaceutical industry, such as the use of puffer and bubble fish as a pain reliever in humans and other on the agenda. Practice to prevent overfishing, inspection, legal penalties. There are ministerial action plan to adapt for each sector: Minister of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change, Minister of Agriculture and Forestry, Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. Turkey is a member of international organizations such as UNFSSA, IPCC, UNDP, FAO, OECD, etc., and has obligation to comply with the framework of international amendments such as Paris Protocol, MARPOL, Barcelona Protocol, EU Directive, and etc. In a conclusion and recommendation, creation of up-to-date foreign species inventory, understanding the irreversible changes in that species create in the ecosystem, benefits and harm. Since the return is not possible, the inclusion of these species in fishing and breeding alternative areas, efficient use of marine resources, introducing new regulation to prevent overfishing, determination of fishery season according to changing migration routes of economic species, making RAS system widespread, bivalve mollusk culture, sponge culture, etc. Inclusion of species such as little more than culture. continuity of current of development and new amendments, protocols, and action plans in nationwide and international areas. Endangered species should be continued to be listed and protected. More research should be done on a stock assessment, economically important fish species, and protective measures should be taken to protect water resources when necessary. Good risk assessment strategy, modeling of dynamics between ecosystem, pollution, and fisheries. Determination and continuity of water and carbon footprints and fisheries sectors as a local and national levels. As a result, from a managerial perspective, we see the advantage of acting with the sector in decision and practice taking for the development of sector. Of course, it's also supported international and national requirements guide during the decision you will make, help and run your roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dede. As I mentioned before, we'll have questions at the end, and we'll move straight into the last presentation by Kjersti Vartdal, who is the Director of Section for Aquaculture Policy and Economy in the Ministry of Trade and Fisheries in Norway. The floor is yours. Let's go ahead.
Thank you very much to the OECD for arranging this workshop, and thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, as you said, I work in the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Fisheries in Norway, and I will talk about the Norwegian experience. The history of aquaculture in Norway started out in the mid-70s by people cultivating salmon in small ponds. Since then, there has been a tremendous growth where aquaculture is expanding both on land and into deeper oceans. I did not include the graph comparing fisheries and aquaculture, but I can say that for Norway, aquaculture have passed wild fish when it comes to value, however, still not for quantity. This graph shows, the pillar shows the production from about nothing in 1980, and then a continuous growth since. And the curve shows the increased value. And today our exports of aquaculture is worth about 10 billion euro. You could also see that the quantity flattens out a bit. And it also shows, I don't know how well you can see it, but the blue is salmon, the red is trout. So this shows that we have succeeded in producing salmon and trout, and we have not yet succeeded in commercializing aquaculture of any other species. Norway is a lead exporter of salmon. When I say salmon, I mean salmon and trout, with more than 50% of the world market. We do have some comparative advantages. Norway has a good climate for producing salmon. We have a long coastline, the right temperature, we have water rich of oxygen, and we have a lot of sheltered locations. We are very concerned with rural policy. I don't know if any of you have been to Norway, but if you've been, you would see that despite that it's very densely populated, people live almost everywhere, especially along the coast. And a consequence is that the general infrastructure was already developed along the coast when we started out with aquaculture. And developing a new industry in rural areas along the coast, it means jobs, it means settlement and tax revenues. So there has been a big will from both state government and the local authorities to facilitate for establishments within aquaculture. Another key factor for the development is the cooperation between management, research institutions, and the industry. And in Norway, we have a tradition for strong regulations. Norway has always had much research on ocean-related issues because of fisheries, because of oil, shipping, etc. And we have managed to include aquaculture in the existing research and the existing research institutes. In addition to a strong governmental investment in research, the industry pays a research fee. This finances research projects within governmental framework, but the industry can suggest relevant programs. There is also a considerable contact between the government and the industry through meetings, public hearings, participation in expert groups, etc. To do aquaculture in Norway, you need a license and you need an approved site. Our legislation does not longer focus on who is the owner, but rather how is the operation when it comes to climate, fish health, and fish welfare. The number of licenses are limited. They are transferable and not limited in time. They can be mortgaged and registered, which gives the industry predictability and financial security. The licensing system also gives the government an overview of the national production capacity. The site approval limits the production at each site by its carrying capacity, and this reduces the area conflicts and addresses the risk of disease transmission. There is a general political desire for future growth in Norway, but there is also a broad agreement, and has been the whole time, that the growth must be sustainable. In 2017, we invented a traffic light system based on environmental indicators within 13 defined production areas along the coast. Today, we have one indicator, that is the impact of lice on the wild salmon. So if the impact on the wild salmon is high, the industry must reduce its capacity with 6%. If the impact is moderate, the capacity will be unchanged. And if the impact is low, the industry can increase its capacity with 6%. Increased capacity is assigned partly as growth of existing licenses and partly as new licenses. Since 2018, we have put on the color of the traffic light every second year. And as you can see from the last assessment on the map of Norway, that we have both some red areas that had to reduce their productivity and the green areas that could grow, and also some yellow areas. Lice is today the only indicator that regulates growth, but there are public discussions on other indicators for the future. An important factor for the legitimacy for the aquaculture industry in Norway is that the industry also pays back to society. Since 2002, the government has taken remuneration for the aquaculture licenses. The costs were not so high in the beginning, but since then, the profitability has increased a lot. And since the introduction of the traffic light system, we have auctioned new capacity through simultaneous clock auctions, and we have received significant payments. The payments goes back to the treasury, and a significant share goes to the coastal municipalities that facilitate for aquaculture industry. Since 2020, the industry has also paid a production fee on every kilo of salmon and trout that is produced. And this year, a resource rent tax on aquaculture of salmon was decided upon in Parliament. Yeah, so where do we go from here? Norway has a well-developed aquaculture industry, but of course we also have challenges like all other countries. We have challenges with the lice and escapes. Our legislation is complex, maybe too complex. Mortality is too high, and we must also, like everybody else, address the climate change. The industry and the politicians, they aim for more growth, both in aquaculture of salmon, trout, and also of other species. However, the possibility for growth is limited until we solve our challenges because the growth must be sustainable. This contributes to accelerating technological development of, for example, technology for offshore aquaculture, land-based aquaculture, and also for technology for closed cages. In the government, we now work on a new legislation for offshore aquaculture. We also work on a better legislation for land-based aquaculture. The industry has always been very innovative, but a lot of the technological development in Norwegian aquaculture has been driven by governmental support through special licenses for technology development and special licenses for research. So this is an important question in our debate now on aquaculture today. How much incentives the government should come up with to speed up the technological development. However, this is in our way a common question when it comes to transition into greener industries. We must work on cutting emissions. However, aquaculture is already a climate-friendly food production with less carbon emissions and less water consumption compared to any other animal production. And as mentioned earlier, it's possible to increase the production more than from wild fish. So we therefore see the importance that COFI puts aquaculture on the agenda, and I hope we'll have many discussions about aquaculture in the future. Thank you.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Kirsty. And let me just underline that this was a fabulous presentation because you used licensing systems as we would do it, I guess, from the OECD side. Market-based instruments, they always work wonders. And it's something of a lesson for, I think, all other countries that needs to be thinking about how to cope with aquaculture and its further development. Due to time constraints, I will allow for 1 or 2 questions. If there are specific questions to the presentations, raise your hands now. The European Union.
Yes, thank you very much. My question is very specific to the Canadian representative. One of your challenges, you said that the demands on transparency does not allow you to deliver on your programs of research, right? Could you please explain a little bit more on what's the constraint and the challenges? Is that your scrutiny is extremely high, so they don't proceed? Or if you could expand there a bit more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. So the scrutiny, it comes from the public on our scientific research. So for example, we have our departmental science that demonstrates, for example, in British Columbia, that the impact of aquaculture on wild Pacific salmon is relatively minor. But we also have independent scientists within Canada who belong to environmental organizations who produce their own science that can counter our own science. And so from a social media perspective, it creates a challenge in the public opinion, right? Whose science do you believe? And so as a result, we tend to get scrutinized. And so from a transparency perspective, we're looking at ways to better communicate our science in a more public friendly rather than technical format. So we're looking at ways to better inform the public on the research that we're undertaking. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Any further questions? If that's not the case, I will just highlight a couple of things here that we have gone through here in this session here, which I think complements very well the second session, which you chaired, Ingrid. And seemingly we have the same problem. We can't have more time, or we should have more time. And it shows, Chair of COFI, that there is a deep interest in the area of aquaculture, and that perhaps you should be thinking about in the not too distant future to have another type of workshop, perhaps more specifically related to a couple of issues that I would like to highlight now, which I think go through all of the presentations that we have listened to this afternoon. One of them is the regulatory area. I mean, there are clearly some countries that have difficulties in weighing the various things against each other. I'm thinking here in particular of the Canadian experience, where on the one hand, environmental protection and other demands on the aquaculture sector makes it extremely difficult to move forward. This is something to do again, I think, with not having a national aquaculture plan. So there are some importance attached to how do you move that forward? Is it through a national aquaculture plan, as we have heard from the United States, that have some successes in setting this in place? Or are there other ways to ensure that the regulatory environment is more positive towards aquaculture development? Again, a specific one, I think it's very important to highlight that there are means and measures also within the aquaculture sector, as we heard from Norway, where we have licenses that are bankable, that are transferable, that are all sorts of things that we in the OECD would highlight as being the best way forward. I think because it builds on economic instruments that we believe are the way to deal with some of these problems that are in the sector. The second area, I think that also some of these presentation has highlighted, is the area of support. The Norwegian presentation by Christy was very clear how long do governments go in terms of supporting the industry. And support here, I think, is very important to realize that it's not only a question about direct subsidization. There are all sorts, and there's a range of way that the industry can be supported, and that needs to be categorized, needs to be understood. What are they good for? What are they bad for? What do they do? And the presentation by Amora was particularly interesting in that respect, I think, and some work there could be usefully taken up by the Committee for Fisheries or the next program of work. I think I will leave it there. I'll just ask Ingrid from the last session if you have anything to add to it, then it's time. If not, I think that you and we should stop and leave it to, I think, Kofi Chair and Guillaume to take over and talk to us to what you have learned from today's, this afternoon's discussion, and where the Kofi might want to invest its future. So I'll leave it to you.
Okay, good afternoon again, everyone around the table and online. So it has been another fantastic day afternoon for us to learn so much about aquaculture. So we took a lot of notes. So thank you for, and we will also look at your presentation in more detail if we have time, when we have time after this meeting. This for me, there was a number of things that came up, and I won't go into deep detail, and I'll let the chair talk about what his feelings are. But some of the question of some of the speakers said, well, we don't know if, for instance, the performance of the environment of our aquaculture system is comparable to others. And others said, well, we know where it is. We have this perfect light. That was recently in that particular session, but it made me think about indicators. And recently we had a celebration for the 30th anniversary of the Joint Working Party on Agriculture and Environment. It made me think about that. And so you don't know, but this is a body that goes, the Agriculture Committee and the Environmental Policy Committee together. It lasts 30 years. So, and there was a lot of, there were people that had been there at the beginning, and they reflected on what happened and where did they move on that. And the first thing they said is that we actually don't know how agriculture performs environmentally. So that was 30 years ago. And nobody has really relevant ways of measuring that, or at least we have difficulty to compare each other. And so that would be an easy step. So we're just going to put it on our agenda and we'll do that. And it took, what, 15, 20 years to get to a good set of indicators that everybody could agree. So the conclusion of those people was that, set the goal, and it might take time, but we'll get there. And so, I mean, I'm a bit exaggerating, but to have a full battery of indicators that we could compare just on environment, performance of agriculture, which might look easy. It's not finished. We continue to develop that battery. So that's just one aspect of the aquaculture. It's not only environment. Of course, there's many other issues, productivity, etc. So what I would hope from that discussion we have tomorrow and a bit today, maybe from the chair, is if we could get a few direction that would help us build something that is going to be useful. Maybe there might be short wins. Some of you said, short term, we could do this and that. Well, building evidence takes time. but it's actually part of what we do at OECD the best, I would argue. Once you have this evidence, you can use it, it's comparable, you can, come back to it. And I would hope that we have some of those direction. We start somewhere and we move on this aquaculture, which is really a very important area and growing for many of you. So that was my little message. So now I'll pass the floor to the chair. We will have more meaningful remarks on what coffee could potentially do based on what you heard.
Thanks a lot, Guillaume. And again, yeah, very many thanks, of course, again to the presenters and the chairs of the various sessions. I was, fortunate to sit back and just enjoy the presentations and very many ideas, I would argue as well, as to what the COFI could work with. I think you listed, I don't know, I didn't count them, but there were definitely dozens of them, I would say. Of course, there are themes there, and I think Carl Christian very well summarized two very sort of clear themes: the one on regulation and the one on support. And those are certainly areas where the OECD and the COFI can add value typically, and where there is a lot of precedence on working with those things. So I think I don't want to preclude also the discussion that will be tomorrow on the PWB, where I'm sure there will be perhaps even further ideas raised as to what could be done in relation to aquaculture. So this is clear that this will be a very important point tomorrow. But I just wanted to perhaps couple of reflections from my side. It's been mentioned already, the countries that don't already have a national plan or strategy for aquaculture are very much wanting to develop a national plan or strategy for it. That is an interesting idea in itself, I think, and perhaps there can be evidence as to whether these national plans or strategies actually work. Do they do what they are intended to do, and what do we mean by this? What is included is also different between countries. So that is certainly an area where there's it would be interesting from a sort of manager point of view to see what countries are doing, I think. On this theme, and going back to Roger Martini's presentation, I think this is also interesting in relation to the support issue, because typically I think these plans would include some form of, multiple forms of support probably. And they are, what we just said, national plans, and the US mentioned in their intervention that this is part of the sort of food security strategy and so on, and that's not unique to the US. That's something that all countries are thinking about in relation to aquaculture. Well, of course, if we are talking about national food security as a paramount sort of interest, there is, to me, some risk that we are also working with policies that might have a distorting effect on trade, which was something which Roger brought up in his presentation in relation to agriculture and what's been done there. So that is something, again, going back to the support issue, and something which the OECD has a lot of competence within, that's an interesting theme. If everybody around the room is developing their own national plan, with the aim of growing their own aquaculture production, yeah, the graph is kind of exponential, but will it be exponential in all countries and so on? We heard from one country which clearly has a comparative advantage in a very mature industry as well. So that's also very interesting to have in the room, of course. But the support issue is certainly interesting, and the EU mentioned that there, of course, can be other types of financial instruments which are also interesting to given the fact that we want to grow the production in many countries, what other instruments than direct support are there, and also market-based solutions will be interesting from that point of view. I certainly also thought a lot about this fact that aquaculture is a bit different from fisheries there, I suppose. As fisheries managers, we tend to be a bit spoiled, maybe, that we don't have our own ministries, perhaps, but most of us, but we do have our own fisheries laws, mainly this sort of fishery law that kind of most countries have it. You know, the European Union has the common fisheries policy, obviously, very important one. And most aspects of fisheries are actually covered by that. And there are some sort of interesting effects when you have fisheries, for instance, in marine protected areas, and sometimes the environmental legislation, you know, doesn't really strike through on fisheries as it does on many other operations in the marine protected area, for instance, whereas aquaculture has a quite a different situation, it seems, certainly in my country as well, where it's a large, you know, plethora of legislation on different levels and so on. I think that's a common challenge that many countries have. Some countries do have an aquaculture legislation. Croatia mentioned this, for instance. Again, does this help or not is something that one might ask oneself. Of course, I think it's a very interesting question, and I think Roger pointed to some, and Martini pointed to some possibilities of analyzing various regulations and so on. The problem I see, and I would like to perhaps hear from members either today or tomorrow, is if we have such a complex regulatory regime, I fear that it will be very complex to actually analyze this as well. That could be really a lot of questions in itself, just sort of numbering the different pieces of legislation and the levels of it. So how do we, again, to quote Roger Martini, how do we start where it's easy on these topics? That's going to be the main challenge, I think, to find these sort of easy gains, if you will, for the committee to sort of get the ball rolling and start to gather data, I suppose, in some way, start to structure data and enable our analysis of this. So yeah, I think those are my sort of initial thoughts. What's the actual payoff of these support policies, of these national plans or strategies, and how can we meaningfully sort of analyze the very complex regulatory field, which aquaculture is in most countries. So thank you, and back to you, Guillaume.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughts. So we again took notes, and let's see how the discussion goes tomorrow as well. You know, since not every one of you will be there tomorrow, I'd like to give a chance to those that, you know, maybe are not members first, if you have any, you know, thoughts or conclusions from that workshop, or even members. Anybody? Yes, EU, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, I think the EU delegation will be there tomorrow, but I will not be there myself tomorrow. So I would like to take this opportunity to make a couple of comments on what we would like to see. First of all, I would like to make a point that there's a lot of things that have been done outside the OECD. So whatever decision is being taken, we will not like to overlap with things that have been done even in forest where not all these members belong to. I'm thinking, for example, right now, very quickly on GFCN, the General Fisheries Committee for the Mediterranean. They have an aquaculture committee that has entered into the regulatory part, and they have written a lot on regulatory part. So, I mean, there are plenty of institutions around that have tackled what I personally like to call the usual suspects of barriers, which is access to space and regulatory. I mean, these are things that people in aquaculture, we have been listening, I think, since aquaculture started. So if you go for this kind of classic, classic barriers, bear in mind everything that is going on there. In this regard, I would like to advance that, for example, in terms of regulatory, us in the EU are going soon to issue a guidance of good practices on regulatory and administrative framework that will be based in the good practices of our member states. And this will be up we have an assistance mechanism that have set up a website with a knowledge platform that is open for everybody. And we are putting a lot of information there from research projects, and we will put this kind of guidances that, of course, they are EU focused, but we are all facing the same we all share plenty of those problems. So
we actually hope it can be also useful for you. Having said that, what we would like to see, I mean, the way we see at it is like if we take outside a little bit the work that has been done in a lot of areas, and we want to get something a little bit more new, because I mean we see the challenges and the concerns that we are going into is climate change, how we're going to de-risk. I mean, these are not the ones that there might be that high in the agenda like 15 years ago. So for us, and if we are thinking in a kind of more regular work on aquaculture from the coffee committee, like we are starting today something that can continue in the time, and we are not going to meet every 10 years from now on, we'll be having a sort of overview of trends and priorities on how the members and the partners of the OECD are promoting aquaculture in a way that this paper is forward-looking. It's entering into areas as how are we looking into climate change? We have heard our Korean colleagues saying, look, we are looking into species. We have heard some others discussing about other things. So where is it that we are going, for example, in climate change? Where it is that we are going, for example, in financial instruments, de-risking? Where it is that they are going with synergies with other sectors, but in a forward-looking, in a way that whenever we meet again, we can have this sort of paper from you, and we go more specific. Okay, we have seen the trends and priorities in all these parts, forward-looking. We want to know more about offshore, so the next one will be on offshore. Or because you have already sent where are the trends, and or maybe the offshore is not a priority for us as an OECD, and it's only few of us that are looking into it. Is this good? Is not? So a little bit of a document that can be used in the future to pick up more specific studies. But as I said, something that is not going into the traditional areas that we all know more, but we would like you to do this extra mile to look into the forward-looking, into what are the risks, the challenges that we know exist now and they are going to grow in the future, and what are the solutions that we are currently giving. Are they good or bad? And whenever we meet, we discuss, okay, look, let's look more into the offshore, let's look more into that. That's a little bit the idea that we will be having from us, from the EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing these thoughts. So very, very useful input. Anybody else wants to provide comments on what you heard today? So I don't think we'll have an item tomorrow on what we heard today on the workshop per se. Or any thoughts, or just on the looking forward, since you mentioned that, I mean, of course, it makes sense for you. What I've seen in agriculture is that if we were only doing forward looking, we would just not forget that today is not perfect. So it's a bit of a balance for us in agriculture, but this is different. I know we're starting a new agenda here, and so it's good to see both present and forward looking sometimes, because if all are well known in the present, then we can move easily to the future. Anyway, Canada, sorry for my comment.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, it's similar to the European Commission. So I also won't be here tomorrow. My colleague will be, but it would certainly be of interest to us for the committee to have the discussion of what is the starting point to collect more information. What is that easy starting point where we can start collecting? Is it simply just, as I had mentioned, collecting more information through the review of fisheries? Is it a checklist of, do you have national legislation? Do you have a national plan? And you know what I mean? And then you can compare that across. And that's entry level. And then, I mean, it is a bit potentially repetitive in the form of what the European Commission is saying, which I do agree with, but we have to start somewhere. So at least if we can say, okay, we can start finding out, okay, what's missing, or what's the common area that we all have, and then we can determine what could be further looked at from there. But anyways, it's just a point to say we certainly would be interested in having that discussion continue. Thank you.
All right, well taken as well. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay, I see people leaving. So I think we're going to close then if nobody else has any any comment to make. So I'd like to, of course, thank again, the participants that came and for the members that were here and online. So thank you also to Linda and Paul for staying for the workshop and making sure everything worked out really well, and the team on my side that prepared everything from the background note that you may have seen, and that was also printed out there, and the agenda, and inviting many of you. So I hope this was useful to you, not only for coffee purposes, but for your own sake, to learn about what others are doing. I think it was a very, very interesting mosaic of experience and interest, and a lot of growing curves, let's say. That's aquaculture for me. So how much can it grow? Let's see. And a lot of potential for sure. So exciting area to work on, and we hope we'll have a chance to continue exchange with you on this in the coming, of course, tomorrow and beyond this. So I'll close on this. We're a bit early, which is good. And thank you again for being here on time and ready to interact. All right, close it.